The wicked mother-in-law. In the bustling town of Umuoba, there was a woman named Mrs. Ngozi Okafor, known by many as a woman of great influence, wealth, and pride. She had 4 sons, all of whom she adored more than anything in the world. But there was one thing Mrs. Okafor despised above all else: her daughter-in-laws. From the moment each of her sons married, she made it her life's mission to make their wives' lives as difficult as possible. She mocked their cooking, criticized their housekeeping, and would never miss an opportunity to belittle them in front of their husbands. Mrs. Okafor was known for her sharp tongue and unyielding demands. The woman had no respite, for she was always around, visiting, demanding, controlling. It wasn't just about the way she treated them. It was the fact that Mrs. Okafor had no interest in ever forming a bond with her daughters-in-law. To her, there were nothing but obstacles between her and her precious sons. She often spoke cruelly about them behind their backs, spreading rumors and creating tension within the family. The 4 women, despite their best efforts to be kind and respectful, found themselves constantly at odds with her. One by one, her sons grew tired of the constant arguments and the toll it was taking on their marriages. But they did not stand up to their mother. She was too powerful, too feared, and so the women endured, swallowing their pain and trying to maintain their marriages despite the bitterness that simmered beneath the surface. As the years passed, Mrs. Okafor grew older. Her beauty, once sharp and striking, began to fade. The weight of her actions started to show in the lines of her face, but her pride never wavered. She continued to be harsh, difficult, and controlling, unaware of the storm that was slowly brewing beneath the surface. One fateful evening, as she sat in her parlor holding court with her sons, Mrs. Okafor suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. She dismissed it as nothing, but by the morning, the pain had worsened and she was unable to get out of bed. The once mighty woman who had ruled over her household with an iron fist now lay helpless, unable to even sit up. Her sons rushed her to the hospital, but the diagnosis was not good. The doctors confirmed that she had a severe heart condition and it would require intensive care. But there was one catch. Mrs. Okafor had never prepared herself for a time when she would need help. She had 4 sons, but no daughter. And now, as she lay in the hospital bed, she realized the bitter truth. None of her sons' wives were there to take care of her. Her sons, although concerned, were often too busy with their own lives to attend to her. They were men, after all, and they didn't know how to care for her the way a woman could. The nurses came and went, but the care Mrs. Okafor so desperately needed wasn't there. The woman who had once lorded over her family now found herself alone, abandoned by the very people she had treated with such cruelty. As the days dragged on, Mrs. Okafor's pride began to wane. She was forced to confront the reality of her life. She had pushed away the very woman who could have cared for her. She remembered all the hurtful things she had said to her daughters-in-law. The insults, the silent judgments, the cruel demands, and it all came rushing back to her in waves of regret. One night, as she lay in the dimly lit hospital room, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps. She looked up to see the faces of her 4 daughters-in-law standing at the door. One by one, they had come, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Each of them, despite the years of mistreatment, had come to take care of her. They had forgiven her. "I know I've wronged all of you," Mrs. Okafor said, her voice weak and filled with remorse. "I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. I thought I was protecting my sons, but I see now that I have driven you all away. Please forgive me." The women stood silently, their faces a mixture of surprise and compassion. The years of tension hung in the air, but there was no anger, no bitterness. There was only the raw, vulnerable truth of a woman who had realized the depth of her mistakes. After a long pause, it was the eldest daughter-in-law, Adaeze, who spoke first. "We've all been hurt, but we've also all been taught one thing: love and forgiveness. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future." The others nodded in agreement, and one by one, they offered Mrs. Okafor their forgiveness. It was then that Mrs. Okafor realized the depth of the love and strength these women had within them. Strength that had been tested by her cruelty, yet remained unbroken. The daughters-in-law decided that from that moment, they would take turns caring for her. They would rotate their visits and ensure she had everything she needed. They cooked for her, cleaned for her, and sat with her for hours, sharing stories and laughter, as though nothing had ever happened. The healing process was slow, but the sincerity of their forgiveness and the warmth of their care was enough to begin mending the broken bond. As weeks turned into months, Mrs. Okafor became a changed woman. She had learned humility and the true meaning of family. Her sons watched in awe as their wives cared for their mother with the same love and devotion they had shown their own children. They had never seen this side of their wives: their strength, their kindness, and their ability to forgive without reservation. The Okafor family, once divided and fractured by bitterness and jealousy, slowly began to heal. Mrs. Okafor, now in her later years, had come to understand that true family was not built on power or pride, but on love, sacrifice, and mutual respect. And so, the family lived happily ever after. 4 sons, 4 daughters-in-law, and a mother who had finally learned the value of love and forgiveness.